This is Liberation Lens. Perspective Matters. Africa's journey from colonial subjugation to political independence ignited dreams of dignity, unity, and self-determination. But freedom, it seems, came with conditions. Conditions dictated by those who once claimed ownership over our lands, our bodies, and our resources. In those first hopeful decades of independence, African nations chose the path of social welfarism, education, healthcare, and public welfare for all. Leaders envisioned prosperity built on communal strength and shared responsibility. Yet, this vision was systematically dismantled. Under the cloak of economic rescue, Western institutions, led by the World Bank and the IMF, forced African nations to abandon their welfare systems, labeling them as communism. Thus, they imposed policies that returned wealth and control back into colonial hands. Today, we ask the difficult questions: was this truly freedom, or simply a new phase of colonial control? Who defines Africa's future, Africans or external powers? Now, journey with us as we decode the truth behind Africa's shift from social welfarism to neocolonial capitalism. Because the truth is uncomfortable, but necessary. Welcome to Liberation Lens. Because, yes, perspective matters. Let's then journey through Africa's transformative decades from independence through social welfare to enforced capitalism. From hope-filled beginnings to imposed structural adjustments, how Africa moved from independence to dependency again. What were Africa's post-independence aspirations? Let me explain. The 1960s and 70s were decades of immense optimism. African nations newly freed from colonialism prioritized collective welfare. Governments invested heavily in public education, healthcare, housing, water, and electricity infrastructure. These weren't mere economic policies. They were fundamental expressions of newly acquired independence and national pride. Let's look deeper. Let's look at the role of leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, and Leopold Senghor of Senegal, who championed state-led development policies and African socialism. How about the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963 aimed at coordinated socio-economic growth? What happened to these initiatives? There is some talk about crisis and the intervention of the Bretton Woods institutions. What was it? What really happened? By the 1980s, Africa's socio-economic progress drew negative attention from the West. They labeled Africa's socio-economic welfare policies as a leaning towards communism and Russia. The World Bank and the IMF declared an economic crisis across Africa, claiming excessive public spending was unsustainable. But why did they label social welfare policies as communist? What really distinguishes communism and social welfarism? If communism represents complete state ownership of all means of production and the social welfare system represents state-supported education, health, and basic utilities without abolishing private property, what really makes the differences? Isn't social welfarism a subset of the communist system? Aren't the goals the same? Aren't they geared towards equity, fairness, and equal opportunities for citizens? By the way, if communism represents complete state ownership of all means of production, doesn't it guarantee collective benefit from the country's gross domestic product? Who is the state? Is the state separate from its citizens? Isn't the state the citizens? Why then would countries be threatened and even punished for leaning towards communism as a geopolitical and socio-economic policy? I think this must be handled as a discussion of its own on another documentary. But let's look at what they imposed on Africa, based on its leanings towards a social welfare system which they styled as communism. They imposed the structural adjustment programs, otherwise known as imposed neoliberalism. Under immense financial pressure, African governments were compelled to adopt the structural adjustment programs, privatizing education, healthcare, utilities, and infrastructure. Structural adjustment simply meant deregulation, privatization, currency devaluation, and reduced social spending. Here are some case examples. Ghana adopted the structural adjustments programs under Jerry Rawlings in the 1980s. Nigeria adopted privatization under Ibrahim Babangida. Cameroon adopted those under Paul Biya. What did this mean for these African countries? It simply meant that neocolonialism was born, a new type of colonialism. Privatization meant dependency. It meant that critical services were handed back to foreign firms, often previous colonial masters. This wasn't development, it was recolonization, known today as neocolonialism. This repossession of authority, foreign ownership, led to wealth extraction, unemployment, and increased poverty in Africa, especially as they brought back their own to fill top positions in these enterprises. We are talking about water, electricity, infrastructure, and healthcare privatization amongst others throughout Africa. You must note that with privatization under neoliberalism, corruption and loss of integrity took center stage, became the order of the day. Neoliberalism not only impoverished nations, it eroded governance, fostered corruption, and undermined African integrity, informed by capitalism and its tendencies. Many privatization deals are conducted behind closed doors, allowing government officials and business elites to manipulate contracts for personal gain. Public assets are often sold to politically connected individuals or firms, leading to monopolies rather than fair competition. Investors offer bribes to secure favorable deals, bypassing regulations and ethical business practices. Foreign companies, particularly in mining and agriculture, often collaborate with corrupt officials to bypass environmental and labor laws. Profits from foreign investments are sometimes funneled into offshore accounts, depriving African nations of much-needed tax revenue. For leaders who stand their ground in the interest of their people, the most likely outcome for them has been death. They are assassinated or overthrown due to resisting neoliberal policies. We are talking about Patrice Lumumba, 1961, Thomas Sankara, 1987, Amilcar Cabral, 1973, and Muammar Gaddafi, 14 years ago, just to name these few. The story doesn't end here. It's a wake-up call for reclaiming African sovereignty. African youth must reclaim their heritage, dignity, and autonomy. They must advocate for transparent governance, indigenous economic solutions, and renewed commitment to social welfare policies tailored to African realities. This means that Africa's future must be rewritten. Africa's future belongs to Africans. By rejecting imposed narratives and reclaiming our collective values of communal ownership and social welfare, we can restore our dignity and ensure a fairer future. Africa's story is not yet fully written. Yes, the scars of neocolonialism run deep, and the dreams of independence have been clouded by imposed capitalist doctrines. But within each of us lies the power to reclaim our narrative, to redefine our future. The Africa we deserve is not one marked by privatized suffering, corruption, and dependency on external masters. Instead, it is one built on collective strength, on solidarity, and on an unwavering commitment to communal prosperity. To every African youth, hear this clearly. Our future cannot mirror the injustices of the past. We must refuse the language of division, of foreign labels imposed upon us: black, white, communist, capitalist. We are Africans. Let us rise boldly. Let us revive our communal heritage, rooted in equity, justice, and dignity for all. Let us reconstruct a continent free from exploitation, guided by African solutions to African challenges. In unity and collective action, there is real liberation. This has been Liberation Lens. And as always, perspective matters. This is the Africa we deserve.